Hello, everyone. Today, I thought we would talk a little bit about some of my favorite tools, which are shears and scissors. I find, well, you can see a quick scrounge through the shop brought a lot of them out. There's all kinds of different ways that these things work and kind of materials that they're good for cutting. I'll say that they're generally undervalued, I think, as a tool and can be applied usefully to all kinds of things in guitar making, including cutting veneer and thin pieces of wood. I'll leave you to play with that for yourself. Anyway, I just wanted to, first of all, talk about the difference between scissors and shears and a little bit on handedness. Scissors, we're told, have blades that are 6 inches or less. That's one definition. Of course, who decides these things, I don't know. And then also, the other definition of scissors, rather than shears, is that the handle's eyes are symmetrical. So these could be scissors by that definition, as well as these and these. And the others, not so much. Well, maybe this. So these are sold as kitchen shears, but the holes are the same size. I suppose it doesn't matter what we call them. People use the terms interchangeably. But it does bring us to an interesting look at handedness. For people that are right-handed, the shears have handles that are fit very, very specifically for the right hand. You can see all the surfaces are designed to be touched and controlled by the right hand of a person, and they work absurdly poorly with the left hand, sharp edges cutting into you, and certainly wouldn't be something that you could tolerate for very long. Now, one of the ways that scissors and shears are used correctly, and I think people do this almost without thinking about it, is that the blades are loaded towards each other by the hand. And by that I mean that there's pressure applied to the top handle to your left and the bottom handle to your right. And what that does is it tends to keep the blades together and tightly touching all the way from end to end as you're cutting with that shear or scissor. You know what? We're going to just call them shears now. That's one thing that happens, and it happens, I guess we learn it probably intuitively as we use our first little pair of scissors. I don't have kids' scissors, safety scissors. These would be probably the closest one. Even though these are supposed to be ambidextrous, the idea of them, you'll see that you still need to push in this direction, putting the blades together, pressuring the handles in such a way that the blades are touching nicely all the way from end to end and not having a gap between them. So when you try and do that, holding it in your left hand, you may find that it's possible to do it, but it feels awkward. Now, I discovered yesterday when I was looking up handedness of scissors that left-handed scissors are available in two distinct styles. One of them is a scissor for people who are left-handed, who are already conversant cutting with right-handed shears or scissors, and so they're disposed this way, in the same way that they normally are for right-handed shears, where the blade on the bottom is on the left side and the blade on the top is on the right side. So the blades are right-handed, but you can buy them with left-handed handles. And then they're also available truly left-handed for, I guess, left-handed people that have never learned to use right-handed shears or scissors. In other words, a true left-handed scissor would be a mirror image, and I don't have one here to show you, a mirror image of this shear. In other words, the blades would be reversed, as well as the handle, the feel of the handle. Anyhow, we'd have a different world if half of us were left-handed. I believe that very strongly. Let's look at a couple of special ones. Here's one that, you know, some of you have had a cast or bandage on. This is one that a healthcare practitioner might use to release a wrapping or bandage from you, because there's a little bit of clearance here for the handles, and they can get in there without mauling you too much. Some of the scissors that we're familiar with are just not very well made. I mean, these aren't bad, but they're kind of sloppy. These would need some attention to be really as good as they could be. They come in all kinds of qualities. Here's some stamped ones, and these are all stamped and don't have some of the subtleties that good shears and scissors have, although they might mimic some of them. So let's go into what some of these subtleties are that make the best shears and scissors perform at a high level. So one thing is, when the best shears are made, this part of the blade, the inside part of the blade that you would think would be flat, is in fact a hollow surface. And I measured just a minute ago with feeler gauges, and the blade down here at the root is 0.004 or 1/10 of a millimeter hollow across its width, which is pretty substantial shape and not an easy thing to make. So you know that they cared about it enough to do that. No expense was spared, as they say, in creating, you know, a beautiful hollow surface on the back of this shear. And that helps in that the blades can be brought together, and this, of course, is where the rubber meets the road for any of this kind of double knife cutting. That's what we have here, two knives disposed to work against each other and trap the material. Anyway, that's one refinement. And then another one is the idea of a laminated blade. And this is the same as chisels. People are aware of chisels from Japan and other places having a two-piece material construction. And in shears, often it says the word inlaid on them. And that means that there's a forged part. This big part here is made of one kind of material. And then you can see it on this one pretty clearly. There's a piece of material here that's added on. And this is just a little strip of super high quality steel that's added to this forging. So forging, of course, referring to the shaped die cavity, forming all these shapes out of one operation as the metal is hot, and it's squished in between two die surfaces to make the part. The material that they use for forging isn't quite up to snuff for the edge, so they forge weld a little strip of hard material here, and it makes the tool work way better. So these are inlaid. All of these beautiful shears, they proudly say that they're inlaid. And so that's what that means, that it's a laminated tool. Now let's look at the binding screw. This is an important thing because the shears need to be secured at exactly the right distance apart so that they work properly without binding and also without looseness. You can see on this set of shears, there's a little wire that they took the trouble to put a wire underneath the screw head, which works as a kind of a lock washer. And they called it, I guess this is 50s marketing speak in the US, they called it U-set, which means that it's easy for the operator to micro adjust the position of this screw and thereby control the distance between the blades, which is critical here at the joint. So you can see that there's two identical pairs of these Compton U-sets here in the lineup, and unfortunately, although one of them was carefully used, and I don't think it was ever sharpened, this pair was sharpened by somebody that didn't understand the tool geometry of a shear, and they did a terrible job and kind of mutilated this fine tool. But we're going to bring this back, and I'm going to show you how to do that in just a few minutes. So let's quick run through all this again one more time. These are stamped ones. They're inexpensive. They have nice feeling handles. I like to use them for things like cutting through sandpaper. I don't care so much about them. I would never cut sandpaper with these beautiful shears with inlaid blades. But it's nice for that. They're easy to sharpen. They're inexpensive. And they give good service. There are quite a number of specialized scissors and shears. These are for cutting hair. These are French brands, and they're quite nice. Seen a lot of use. They're probably pretty old. And I looked up online and saw that you can spend upwards of $1,300 on a pair of scissors just this size for cutting hair. Even ones that are inexpensive seem to cost a couple $100. So that's kind of interesting. I wonder what they do to make them better aside from marketing. And then these, of course, these tools are for cutting metal, which they do quite well. And I think you can see this blade is inlaid. You can see the two colors here, and it says, of course, inlaid on the handle so that we know that it's a good tool. These are a little bit different pattern. These would be for cutting curves. Also made by Wiss Company. And these say drop forged, which is the process that we were just talking about, which all of these are drop forged or forged. And then these are shears for sheet metal. And I believe I have to show you a pair of lefts and rights, as they say. So here's a pair of shears, same pattern, same make. One designed for cutting to the left and one designed for cutting to the right. And then all other things being equal, normal shears, you just get one, then you'll get a right-handed one like all of these. And then you can see a further refinement on these tools is a serration, which helps slippery hard material like metal, kind of helps it increase the friction and keep it from sliding out of the jaws as you try to make your cut. This will help clamp the material to the tool with a little extra friction. And this one, you can see, has the same idea. And I'll just tell you a story. I can't demonstrate this for you right now, but when I was first playing around with composite materials, of course, I had to try out Kevlar because Kevlar has some amazing properties. Kevlar is very difficult to cut. It's one of the amazing properties that it has. Very difficult. And on scissors and shears that are designed to cut Kevlar, there are micro teeth, tiny, tiny little teeth in this style, but very small, designed to keep the darn Kevlar in between the blades where it can get cut. Again, very difficult material to cut, and it's easy for that to slide out and escape getting cut. So here's an interesting kind of utility scissor, I guess, with a spring return. Finally, wow. Again, Wiss, this is an important American manufacturer of these things. These are called pinking shears, and these are for cutting fabric. and they leave so-called a pinked edge. And it's designed to help keep the fabric from unraveling. Now, I know you're not supposed to cut paper with these, but there it is. Anyway, so that's how that works. And if this were fabric woven in the direction of this graph paper, it would help to keep the fibers from falling out of the weave by interrupting the cut with that zigzag motion. And I'll tell you that this is one of the first tools that caught my attention as a 6-year-old. I was just stunned at how beautifully made they were. My mother's pair was exactly like this, and she used it for dressmaking. And I really learned everything about making stuff from my mom. It somehow dawned on me that this was a very special tool and was very carefully made. I spent hours looking at how these teeth intersected perfectly. Of course, if the cutting edges don't line up right, nothing happens. The material will just slip out of the, or sometimes it'll just fold over if you try and cut something really thin. Like here's a piece of 1.5 thousandths plastic. If you try and cut it with things that don't work very well, it just folds over. But in order for this to cut properly, these teeth all have to have their surfaces perfectly match the arcs coming from the pivot, or else it won't work. A word about sharpening. All scissors, including these beautiful pinking shears, are correctly sharpened only on the top surface. Never do we want to try and sharpen any other surfaces of the tool. We're going to go to the grinding room in a minute and do that. But this is the surface that we're going to address. We'll just mimic, unless we have a reason to change it, we'll just mimic the angle that the tool designer put on the shears or scissors that we're going to be sharpening. And then finally, to round up the whole idea of a shear, here's a kind of a paper shear, we call it, or paper cutter. I promise you, you can do a lot more than cut paper. Here's a little piece of 10 thousandths hard brass that I just cut off with this shear, and here's how that goes. Just really amazing cut. I mean, if you check this out, 46. Okay, so within a few thousandths, 46, get that in. Oh, 40, yeah, 49. Anyway, within 5 anyhow, and that's just me holding this beat up edge against a piece of material. These, by the way, are also inlaid, and I think you can see that there's the line here where the extra special tool steel is welded onto the blade. This one, I believe, is not hollow. It's not hollow, but it's set at a very small angle in this direction. And then inside here, there's a spring that automatically does the work that we do with scissors, automatically pushing the top blade this way and the bottom blade that way in order to hold the cutting edges together. So when you operate this tool, of course, we'd be pushing this to the left, And, you know, there it is doing a lovely job on paper. Finally, the big daddy of shears over here. This is a very substantial piece of machinery, not too different than a scissor, really. 2 blades. Again, like the paper shear, this one has 1 moving part instead of 2. You can see here's a spring-loaded hold down that touches the material before it gets cut. And this is a lovely piece of gear, which is good to have around the shop for shearing up sheet metal, rubber, plastic. Again, these things all work very well on thin wood. So that's something that you can try them out for. Awfully quick way to cut, doesn't make any dust. Often the way to go. So next thing, we're going to try and sharpen some of these guys. See how that works. Here we are with 2 pairs of beautiful Compton shears. Again, we have one that was well cared for and one that was tended to by an abusive grinder. This gives us a good example of showing you how you can bring back one of these things from the dead, and we'll get to lubrication and adjustment on this one too. All right, so I have a 180 grit belt, aluminum oxide belt on here. First, I'll just sharpen these, which, you know, don't really need much sharpening. They're in good condition. I think they have been sharpened maybe once before. And of course, you can see that by the fact that there's less material here than you would normally expect there to be if you follow this line out there. Okay, so first we'll quickly sharpen this pin, and it is quick, sharpen this pair, and then we'll get into rehab on the other pair. Okay, so removed a very small amount of material. Didn't really throw much of a burr. So I forgot to bring anything to cut, but we'll just close it once. And these seem to be pretty nicely set as well. All right, so these are done. So all we've done is just copy the original bevel. Now, for this set, I think we need, first of all, to change to a much heavier grit. So I guess what you couldn't see in our camera angle was that the reason that I know when to stop cutting is when the beat up edge disappears. And you can see that quite clearly from your position right here. You can watch how the edge of the blade gets cleaned up so that it all looks nice and pretty and even with this surface intact. So fortunately, you know, whoever it was that did a bad job of grinding this didn't touch the back. That would have been the end of it. But so now we're going to go in and just take a very light cut with this finer grit material, 180 grit. Okay, it's a light burr. It's such nice steel, it can't throw a heavy burr. And that just rubs the burr right off. All right, so let's go back to the bench and see how we can fix up the adjustment on this one. First, we'll see how these guys work. They're both cutting effortlessly. Now, this one, like I said, I think is probably about right. We could, since it's a U set, we can take a tiny bit on there and see how that feels to us. Yeah, I think that's good. And then finally, let me introduce to you this fine product made by AGS. Anyway, it's called dripless oil. And the viscosity of this makes water look thick. So dripless it ain't. But the idea is that it wicks in to wherever it is it can go, which is everywhere. And then the volatile parts evaporate and it leaves a waxy, greasy residue that does not drip out. So why they decided to call it dripless oil, I'll never know. If you're trying to lubricate a cable inside a sheath, like on a motorcycle or a bicycle, this stuff is magic. It just flows right down to the other end in a second. Anyhow, boy, that feels great. It was actually benefited by a tiny adjustment. Now this one, let's see. Well, see how this feels. Pretty good, actually. You don't want them to be loose, but you don't want to have to struggle with them either. And take up just a tiny bit. Well, we'll loosen it a lot. That you don't want. Okay. And this little wire device is working really, really well to retain the position of the screw. Keeps it from rotating while you're using the shears. A little too tight. Sounds great. And you know, it's all about sound, isn't it? Let's see what happens. I've been talking about wood, but I haven't cut any of it for you. So here's a piece of curly mahogany that's, I don't know, 0.75 millimeters, 30 thousandths. You can see what happens. It's easy to cut here. And then as we get farther away from the pivot, you have to exert more force, and it's harder to cut. Anyway, it's doing a beautiful job. I don't know if you can see just how nice that is. It's hard to see how it would happen any quicker. See if these cut any differently. Nope. All right, so what I've done is put my hand outside the handle so I can get a little bit more leverage on it, and that seems to be able to power through the cut on that. I think we've succeeded in restoring this badly sharpened set of gorgeous shears, inlaid shears, to work just as well as they would have worked when they were new. And gosh, I don't know, shear stuff up, have fun. Well, I looked over this segment and I decided there were a few more things I wanted to talk about in the scissors and shears department. So one is that scissors have been used for a long time to cut out silhouette portraits, and they were very common in the years 1500 to, well, until the mid-19th century or late 19th century, when photography became developed. So in order to capture the look of a person, people became very skilled at using scissors, and it just shows what an incredible tool it is. And if you look at this link, you'll see kind of an astonishing lifelike likeness that somehow is just created with this one line cut by a scissor. So a scissor can be thought of as a pair of collaborating knife blades. And if we'll just look at tool geometry for a minute, we'll see that, so this would be your view here, looking down this way at the blades. So there has to be clearance. We know there always has to be clearance for cutting. And we can get it in scissors in two different ways. The simple way is with a shear like this, where this part of the blade, the back of the blade here, is flat, but it's twisted a little bit. Each one of the blades is twisted a little bit, and here you can see that's the twist. So the blades can pass by each other without rubbing the whole way, and there's a little bit of clearance, just a couple of degrees of clearance here. And then the other way of doing it is by grinding a hollow surface, and that would something that, of course, we just spoke about, where there's this back of the cutting blade is hollow all the way along to the end. Obviously, a tricky thing to do in a piece of tool steel to create this tiny hollow. And then another refinement of scissors that I'd like to bring up is the fact that the blades of scissors are very slightly curved in this direction. So If we put a straight edge this way, we can see that there's a hollow again along the length of the blade, and that doesn't matter whether it's this old-fashioned forged kind or a modern stainless pair. These are both slightly curved in this direction. They almost have to be in order to keep the cutting edges in contact as they close. And you can see that when scissors are closed, there's a little gap right here. When the tips are touching, these surfaces here are not touching. So it's just supported at the pivot and the tip at this point. And I might also say that even though I have a lot of affection for these beautiful old shears, the modern ones are quite good, and stainless steel has taken its place as a cutting steel, whereas so not too long ago it was a pretty poor choice, but now the metallurgy has gotten so much better that stainless steel can hold a pretty good edge for quite a while. One of the reasons that scissors can stay sharp for a long time is that the rake angle is fairly small. So the included angle here, or the sharpness angle, is quite big, and it means that the edge is robust and a strong shape. I've measured a whole lot of my tools here, and the rake angle, which is this angle here, all right, this angle, whatever this is, varies quite a bit. Most of them are about 25 or 35 degrees. And then some of them are quite a lot less than that, almost straight, near zero rake. And then a few of them had a lot more rake on them like that. And of course, these will dull more quickly the more rake there is, the more positive rake. As we know, the more positive rake there is, the smaller the sharpness angle is, and therefore the edge becomes less robust. Okay? So, two ways of getting clearance. One is by twisting the blades. One is by grinding the blades hollow, the old-fashioned way. And it turns out the old-fashioned way is pretty old. It seems like scissors have been around in humans' toolboxes for 3,000 or 4,000 years, originating, I believe, in Mesopotamia. The oldest style are these kind of spring shears like this, where it's all just one piece of material. And then somehow in the middle of the Roman age, the golden age, maybe 100 BC, the Romans added a pivot. So they became easier to handle and a little bit more efficient, I believe, to use. Now, it's a little confusing sometimes to think about how scissors or shears are called out in length. This one says 12 inches, and we can tell by our primitive ruler here that that is 12 inches long, but the blades are only 6 inches long, and sometimes, confusingly, scissors or shears are measured by the blade length and sometimes by their overall length. So I wanted to show you this one tool that escaped my notice when I first went around to round up all my tools. So this one, I believe, is specifically a kitchen tool for poultry. You can see that it took a little hit over here where it got chipped. But this is almost like a saw on the bottom. It's quite a low rake angle, very square, very strong shape. And up on top, we have a more typical, maybe 35-degree rake angle. Kind of an elegant tool with nice knife handles, designed for use in a kitchen. Cut up birds. Well, I think that's about all I have to say about scissors and shears for now. And if I If I come across other things, I'll give you another PS. Thanks for watching.